Corrupt Authority by yours truly. But conditions are ready, and thunder always strikes— Baku! Shouted Kenta, pointing at the magneton. Pay them back triple! Flamethrower! The scientist sneered at him. Ha! Even with the type advantage, your damage is halved thanks to— The rest of his sentence was cut off as Bakufun's fire breath found him, along with his magneton. The Typhlosion didn't cease flame until almost 15 full seconds had passed, and Kenta had to run up and yank on Bakufun's back to keep him from continuing. Stop! Don't! You'll kill him! Bakufun let off, slumping down, then pointed with a paw to his throat. Kenta understood in a moment what he was trying to say. Oh, you got paralyzed and you couldn't stop. Alright, I think you've taken enough. But Bakufun was up and on his hind legs, snarling and baring his blackened teeth in spite of his injuries. The two remaining Sylph scientists gasped in terror and ducked behind the door, slamming it. Monster! Kenta heard one of them crying loudly. That's not a Pokemon! It's a devil! Seeing the front passage was clear, Kenta checked behind him. Officer Sosuke's Growlithe was gone, and he was crouching near the doorway they'd escaped from, holding its Pokeball tenderly in his hands. Officer Day's Weezing was locked in combat with another Magneton, whose owner had thankfully not been reckless enough to cast Thunder. Kenta waved urgently to them. Retreat! You can't beat him! Steel types are immune to poison! Day nodded and shouted, Smog Attack! Before following his comrades and Saishi down the hallway towards the stairs. Behind them, a cloud of toxic green gas billowed out and blanketed the passage in impenetrable murk. The small force of escapees had reached the staircase when Day pressed the elevator button and the doors immediately opened. I'm setting up a decoy, he said, rushing inside and pressing the lobby button. Ducking back out, he followed the group as Kenta led the way down the stairs. The steps were somewhat slippery because of the water sprinklers, and everyone but Bakufun clung to the banister as they hurried down to the lowest floor. Further up, Kenta could hear angry shouting issued from jostled Sylph workers on higher floors, getting closer each second. Keep up the pace, he commanded as they swept past the second floor. From behind, he heard Day ordering his Weezing to use another smog on the hallway, which in turn covered the Sylph workers in a blinding fog before they could react quickly enough. Any goons on the first floor we should know about? Kenta asked Saishi as they neared the door. No, came her speedy reply. There shouldn't be anybody except— At that moment, they reached the bottom of the stairs, where they were greeted by the sight of Shin being held at gunpoint by the woman behind the desk. That bitch of a secretary. Don't move! She screamed, holding the pistol less than a foot away from Shin's head while he kept his arms raised high in the air. Any sudden movement, and he dies! At that moment, the elevator creaked open, which Day had set up on the third floor. For a split second, the secretary's eyes shifted to the splitting doors, and the moment later, Kenta heard a loud bang from right behind him. The secretary dropped out of sight below the desk, and Shin leaned over to the side automatically to see what had happened. Kenta knew before he did, as he glanced behind him to see Miss Saishi holding up her own smoking pistol. Dead! He heard Shin cry in surprise, looking back at the group at the bottom of the stairs. Kenta, what is going— Kenta heard an incoming clanking from behind him. He turned around just in time to see another Electro bouncing down the stairs straight at the whole group, like a great lethal bowling ball. A flash of red shot out in front of the escape party, and the next moment, an explosion expelled the small force backwards and sent them skidding across the waxed floor. Kenta scrambled to his feet and looked to see what had just happened. Bakufun was lying on the floor beside a fainted Electrode, chest rising and falling rapidly. This was now the second self-destruct attack he braved in 5 minutes, and Kenta simply couldn't imagine how he was able to take so much abuse. Explanations later! Barked Saishi, sprinting headlong for the door and grabbing Kenta's arm as she passed him. We have to go! Baku, return! Called Kenta, holding up the Typhlosion's Pokeball as he was pulling away. The red beam shot out and disintegrated his Pokemon back into its safety zone, and Kenta exhaled in relief. He'd have time to thank his loyal Pokemon partner when they were back home, but first they had to get out alive. In the meantime, he sprinted after Saishi, Day, Shin, and Sosuke as they dove for the door and burst through it. The chill of early November air struck his face, and its implication of freedom was one of the best feelings of his life. But there was one more thing to do. Thinking quickly, Kenta broke away from the group and made a dash to the right and down the first alley. Behind him, the sounds of sirens were approaching, and he hastened to get his deed finished. Pulling a luxury ball from his pocket, he gave it a light toss out in front of him. In a burst of light energy, a creature with the appearance of a shell on 4 legs stood before him, teething on something in its mouth. Kenta reached back into his pocket and pulled out the Master Ball he'd been given 10 minutes previously, and held it out in front of the shell gun on the ground. "Bolt, spit that out. I have something else you need to hold now." The shell dragon coughed a grayish-blue stone with a dotted pattern into his hand, an Everstone. Kenta knelt down and held the Master Ball out for Bolt to take, when he heard rapid footsteps approaching from behind. Standing up and turning around, he found himself at gunpoint as Saishi glowered at him with trembling limbs. "You dirty pig," she spat. "I knew you just wanted that ball for yourself. Give it back to me this instant, or I swear to the gods I will pull this trigger and blow your head wide open." Kenta looked at her, at the pistol in her shaking hands, and took a deep breath to compose himself. "If you shoot me," he warned, "my shell gun will shatter your Master Ball between his teeth. He knows crunch. He's more than capable of doing it." "I see. Then I'll have to shoot him first." "Bad idea." Kenta stiffened, bending his knees in preparation to make any necessary sudden movements. He knows Protect also, for exactly this kind of reason. His eyes narrowed. "And if you do shoot him, I will break your neck with my bare hands, even if it's in full sight of the whole police force. Nobody threatens my Pokemon's life." The two of them stood there in the alley, staring each other down, while in the background patrol cars screeched to a halt and police could be heard shouting to one another as they charged into the Sylph building. Kenta glanced behind him at his shell gun, who was still standing dutifully awaiting orders. "Bolt," he muttered, "go hide in the bushes back there. Do not let this maniac hit you. She's already killed one person." Bolt blinked to show he understood, and twisted around and ducked into the undergrowth. Kenta turned back to Saishi, smiling grimly. "I'd put that gun down if I were you," he muttered so that only she would hear. "If any of my force happens to see you holding an officer up, you'll be off to prison just like the people you betrayed." Saishi smiled back nastily. "That's what you think." Turning, she waved her hand over to the patrol cars, shoving the gun hastily under her shirt. "Captain Arcata! Over here! Over here! Quickly!" Kenta's stomach leaped at the name of his captain being mentioned. From around the corner of the Sylph building, he could just make out Captain Wester Arcata approaching him with 2 deputies at his heels. "Go take the building!" Kenta heard him command the other 2. "I'll be fine. Report back in 5 minutes." "Captain," blurted Kenta hastily as Arcata marched up behind Saishi. "Be careful! She's got a gun!" "He has the Master Ball," said Saishi even more quickly, turning to Arcata and pointing to Kenta. "Thank goodness you're here! Tell him to hand it over!" Kenta's heart rammed even faster as Arcata took his eyes off Saishi and focused his full attention on him. "Kenta!" said the captain loudly and passionately, looking at him in surprise. "You have it? Good work, my boy. Excellent. I'll take over possession of it now. We have to get it out of here before things get any worse on this block." For a moment, Kenta considered calling Bolt out of the brush to deliver the precious ball to his superior officer. After all, it was his civic duty, and it came as a natural impulse. But something was holding him back, and it wasn't just his own wish to see the Master Ball gone either. The air between Captain Arcata and Miss Saishi lacked the usual hostility of absolute police authority over law-breaking civilian. Rather, it was as if police captain and self-conspirator were actually cooperating. He stared at them for a moment, hesitating, then made up his mind and sealed his fate. "Captain," he said in a reasoning but insistent tone, "that woman was going to shoot me. She almost did just now." "That's not important at the moment," answered Arcata impatiently. "Right now, what's important is—" "Not important?" demanded Kenta incredulously. "How can you say that? Don't you care if I live or die?" "Miss Saishi's knowledge and the Master Ball's power can affect the world more than one cop's actions ever could," said Arcata sternly. "You did your duty in seeing both safely out of Sylph Corporation. Now it's time to move on." "What?" Kenta stared at him, shocked, and his brain clicked. "Wait, how did you know I was guarding her? I didn't mention anything about that over the phone." Arcata looked taken aback, then resumed his stern face. This time, however, there was some pity in his voice, similar to how he'd sounded when he'd called Kenta at the stadium. "I'm sorry, Kenta," he said sadly. "I couldn't let you know anything. It might have affected Miss Saishi's safety." "What? You could tell him later, Saishi growled irately, her hand hovering over her shirt at the place where she'd stored her gun. Just order him to give you the ball. No, shouted Kenta, unwilling to let Arcada's explanation be cut off. I need to hear this. Continue!